Okay, let's unpack this. You've brought us some really fascinating source material today.
Yeah, it's excerpts from Egypt's official Biennial Transparency Report.
Right, and for anyone not totally immersed in climate policy acronyms, that's basically Egypt reporting to the UNFCCC, the UN climate body.
Exactly. It's them saying, here's where we stand on climate change, the challenges we face, what we're actually doing about it, and how we're trying to track our progress.
And what's great is that this isn't just, like, dense policy speak, is it?
Not at all. It's a real window into how a major developing country is grappling with this. It lays out their unique situation, geography, climate, population pressures, all of it. And then it details their actual strategy, both for cutting emissions, mitigation, and also for adapting to the impacts that are already hitting them hard.
So our mission, really, in this deep dive is to cut through the report language, pull out those crucial insights.
Yeah, give you a shortcut to understanding Egypt's climate story straight from their own reporting.
Think of us as your guides through these pages.
It's quite revealing, seeing the complexity of climate action on the ground, especially in a place facing so many interconnected challenges. Shall we dive in?
Let's do it. To really get Egypt's climate action, we have to start with the basics, the national circumstances. What's the context here?
Okay, well, fundamentally, you're looking at a hot, dry desert climate. Very typical for the region.
2 main seasons, right?
Yeah, basically. A milder winter, sort of November to April, and then a really hot summer from May to October. And temperatures aren't just high, they can swing dramatically, especially inland, away from the coast. The report mentions, daily swings in summer from maybe 7 degrees Celsius at night right up to 43 degrees during the day. That's huge.
Wow, and they also have those Khamsin winds.
These intense, hot, dry, dusty winds. They can cause temperatures to spike really quickly.
So heat and dryness, that immediately makes you think water scarcity.
It's absolutely critical. Rainfall is minimal, mostly just along the Mediterranean coast.
Yeah.
Add high evaporation rates and the fact that there's basically no permanent surface water outside the Nile system. Yeah, water's incredibly scarce.
And then you layer people onto that scarcity. The report flags Egypt's population as massive.
It really is. Over 105 million as of early 2024.
And growing fast.
Yeah, the projections show Egypt being among the countries contributing most significantly to global population growth by 2050.
But where do all these people actually live? That's the striking part.
Right. Over 95% are concentrated in the Nile Valley and the Delta.
Just crammed into that fertile strip.
Exactly. Imagine the density. Meanwhile, you've got vast areas of desert that are almost empty.
So this rapid growth and intense concentration.
Yeah.
Massive pressure on resources.
Enormous pressure. On water, obviously, but also on energy. And the report points out that energy demand is primarily met through fossil fuels right now.
Which directly links to their greenhouse gas emissions.
Precisely. It's a core part of their climate challenge.
Okay, so you've got this tough environment, scarce resources, intense population pressure, all focused in one area. How is Egypt even set up institutionally to tackle something like climate change?
Well, according to the report, they have put specific arrangements in place. A key player is CAPEMS.
That's the Central Agency for Public Mobilization and Statistics.
Correct. Think of them as Egypt's main statistics agency. They're the ones tasked with collecting the national data needed to estimate greenhouse gas emissions across all the different sectors.
How do they get that data?
Mostly through questionnaires sent out to public sector entities and private companies.
Okay, so CAPEMS is the data engine.
All right.
Who's steering the ship, setting the direction?
There's a National Council for Climate Change, the NCCC.
Right.
This sounds like a coordinating body. It brings together various government ministries, environment, planning, electricity, petroleum, transport, water, the key players. Plus, importantly, representatives from the private sector and civil society, so multi-stakeholder.
And what about tracking progress and being accountable? Is there a specific system for that?
Yes, and the report really emphasizes this. Their monitoring, reporting, and verification system, the MRV system.
Crucial for transparency.
Absolutely. They state it's vital for tracking both their climate actions and any international support they get. And they aim for it to follow the TACC principles. That's transparency, accuracy, competence, comparability, and consistency.
The gold standard for climate reporting, basically.
Pretty much. Yeah.
Are they also weaving climate change into their laws and regulations?
They are. The report details how they're updating legal frameworks. They mention things like a new water resources law in 2021, specific laws for renewable energy and electricity from a few years back,
Okay.
decrees about using alternative fuels in the cement industry, adjusting customs tariffs to encourage electric vehicles, and updates across agriculture and infrastructure regulations, too.
So trying to embed it systemically.
That seems to be the goal, yes.
Mm.
Integrating climate considerations into the fabric of how things are run.
Let's talk about the emissions themselves. The report includes Egypt's greenhouse gas inventory, their GHGI. What does that tell us? Which sectors are the main emitters?
It covers the standard categories. Energy is the big one. Then industrial processes and product use, IPPU, agriculture, forestry, and other land use AFOLU, and waste.
And the methodology, are they following international best practice?
Yes, they follow the 2006 IPCC guidelines. That's the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and the 2019 refinement to those guidelines.
Okay.
They use a tiered approach, which basically means using more detailed methods where they have good data and simpler default methods elsewhere.
Where does the data come from?
A mix. National sources like CEPINAS and the Ministry of Petroleum and Mineral Resources, MOPMR, but also international sources like the International Energy Agency, the IEA. And they try to use country-specific emission factors where possible. Otherwise, they use the standard IPCC default values.
How reliable are these numbers? Do they mention quality control?
They do. They have quality assurance and quality control QA/QC procedures built in. This involves checking data against different sources, cross-validating, and importantly, having third-party experts review the inventory.
Okay, that's good. What about uncertainty? Every inventory has some level of uncertainty.
Right. They quantify it. For the total inventory in 2022, they estimate the uncertainty at around 6.7%.
That seems fairly standard.
Yeah, but the uncertainty for the trend over time was higher, reported as about 26.8% in 2022. Trend uncertainty is often higher.
Any key numbers or findings jump out from the 2022 inventory?
Well, one interesting point they make is about per capita energy emissions. In 2022, it was around 2.23 tons of CO2 equivalent per person. They note this figure has stayed relatively stable since 2005, even with economic development.
Well, it might explain that.
They suggest it could be down to energy price increases, making people more conscious, or perhaps energy efficiency measures starting to bite.
What about specific gases or sources that were significant in 2022?
Looking beyond just CO2, direct N2O nitrous oxide emissions from managed agricultural soils were significant. And methane, CH4, from wastewater treatment and discharge was also a major contributor.
And methane from other sources?
Yes, solid waste disposal landfills, basically, and enteric fermentation, which is methane from livestock digestion, were also highlighted as notable sources.
The report also talks about recalculations. Why did they redo some numbers and what was the impact?
This is really important for understanding how climate accounting evolves. They updated their calculations using the latest global warming potential values, the GWPs, from the IPCC's Fifth Assessment Report, AR5.
These GWPs reflect how potent each gas is compared to CO2, right?
Exactly, over a 100-year time frame. And the science on this gets refined. For example, the GWP for methane changed significantly. It went from 21 in the older AR2 report values they might have used previously up to 28 in AR5.
So using the newer, more accurate value.
Meant their estimated emissions from the waste sector, which produces a lot of methane, jumped up quite a bit.
Even if the actual amount of methane being released didn't change.
Precisely. It's about better accounting based on the latest science, not necessarily worse performance. They also mention recalculating some industrial data where they found inconsistencies in previous figures.
It sounds like putting together this inventory is a complex task. What challenges did they mention?
They're quite open about the hurdles. Things like insufficient data infrastructure, just not having the systems to collect everything smoothly. Limited human resources, not enough people trained in these specific inventory methods.
Coordination issues.
Yes, getting different ministries and agencies to work together effectively. Significant data gaps in key areas like agriculture and coastal zones, and underdeveloped monitoring systems overall.
What do they suggest to improve things?
Key recommendations include strengthening CAPSES's role as the central data coordinator and developing more standardized data collection systems across the board.
Okay, so that's the emissions picture. Based on that and their national situation, what climate goals has Egypt set? What are their NDC's nationally determined contributions?
Right, so Egypt submitted its second updated NDC to the UNFCCC in June 2023. Their targets are set relative to a business-as-usual a BAU projection for the year 2030.
And just to clarify, BAU is like a baseline scenario.
Exactly. It's projecting what their emissions would likely be in 2030 if they didn't implement new climate policies or actions beyond what was already happening. Their targets are reductions below that projected level.
Got it. So what are the specific quantitative targets for 2030?
They've set targets for three key sectors. First, the electricity sector, a 37% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions below that 2030 BAU level.
Okay, 37% for electricity.
Second, the oil and gas sector, a 65% reduction, but specifically focused on emissions from associated gases, the gas that comes up with oil extraction.
65%, that's ambitious. And the third?
Transport, aiming for a 7% reduction below BAU by 2030.
And the time frame, the baseline year for that BAU projection.
They use 2015 as the reference year for calculating the BAU pathway, and the targets are set for achievement by 2030.
Okay, those are some clear targets. How is Egypt actually doing? How are they tracking progress towards these NDC goals based on this report?
The report indicates they're making notable advancements, particularly in those three sectors with the specific quantitative targets we just mentioned.
Let's take electricity first, that 37% reduction target by 2030. Where are they now?
Well, as of 2022, they report having achieved a 34.34% reduction compared to the BAU level for that year.
34% already. That sounds like significant progress.
It is. That translates to avoiding over 47,000 gigagrams, that's 47 million tons of CO2 equivalent emissions in 2022 alone, compared to what BAU predicted. So yeah, they're getting quite close to that 37% target already.
What's driving that success in the power sector?
It seems to be a combination of factors. They mentioned adopting more energy-efficient technologies in power generation. Removing fossil fuel subsidies is likely playing a role.
Makes renewables and efficiency more competitive.
Exactly. Also, converting older, less efficient power plants to combined cycle technology, which is much more efficient. A big push on LED lighting across the country. And critically, abandoning plans they previously had for new coal power plants, and instead significantly scaling up renewable energy.
How much scale-up are we talking?
The report gives figures showing installed wind and solar capacity jumping from under 900 megawatts in their 2015-16 fiscal year to over 3,300 megawatts by 2020-2023. That's a big increase.
And efficiency improvements within the power plants themselves.
They highlight a decrease in the specific fuel consumption rate, basically. How much fuel you burn to generate a kilowatt hour of electricity. That rate dropped by over 17% between 2015-16 and 2020-23.
What about efficiency on the user side, the demand side?
That's contributing too. They mentioned replacing over 4 million streetlights with efficient units and distributing something like 156 million LED lamps to households and businesses. These measures add up to substantial electricity savings.
Any weak spots mentioned? Grid losses, maybe?
Transmission and distribution losses were reported at 19.4% in 2022. That's still quite high, an area for improvement. But the overall mitigation trend in electricity looks strong.
Okay, what about oil and gas? The target was 65% reduction in associated gas emissions.
Also showing strong progress here. They report achieving a 57% reduction compared to their BAU baseline as of 2022.
57%, so well on the way to 65.
Yeah, that represents a cumulative reduction of about 1,350 gigagrams or 1.35 million tons of CO2 equivalent.
How are they achieving that? What are they doing with the associated gas?
The main strategy is capturing gas that would otherwise just be burned off at the oil well. Instead of wasting it, they're recovering it. They then redirect it into gas pipelines, use it to generate power right there on site, or send it to processing facilities.
Sounds sensible. Are there projects happening?
Yes, they mentioned 17 projects already implemented for gas recovery and utilization, with plans for another 36 by 2030.
Any challenges noted in this sector?
Yes, funding is mentioned as a challenge, specifically for getting advanced equipment needed to accurately measure flaring and also potential fugitive emissions, unintentional leaks. They also note a need for more expertise in using some of these advanced monitoring techniques.
Right. Now, transport had that 7% target. How's progress looking there?
Here, the report is a bit less specific on the numbers achieved so far. It mentions ambitious plans, but states the aggregate emission reduction percentage achieved is to be reported in future updates.
Ah, okay. So they're working on it, but maybe the data isn't fully compiled or tracked in the same way yet?
That could be it. They definitely outline the initiatives they're pursuing.
Such as?
A major focus is expanding public transport, especially in Cairo, extending the metro, building the new light rail line out to the new administrative capital, the monorail project.
Big infrastructure project.
Yes. Also modernizing the national railway network. And promoting lower emission vehicles, they mention plans for electric buses as part of a bus rapid transit BRT system.
What are the roadblocks in the transport sector?
Finance is a big one. These projects are expensive, potential public resistance if fares for new systems need to be higher, and the high upfront cost of electric vehicles and the charging infrastructure needed to support them.
So definite action, but maybe slower progress on the quantitative tracking for the NDC target itself.
That seems to be the picture presented in this report, yeah.
Beyond those three sectors with specific targets, does the report mention mitigation efforts elsewhere?
It does, though the progress tracking is more descriptive, less quantitative for NDC purposes.
Give us a quick rundown. Industry.
In industry, there's work on decarbonizing energy-intensive sectors like cement production. A key strategy mentioned is using alternative fuels, like refuse-derived fuel or RDF made from waste. They're also promoting energy efficiency improvements and the concept of eco-industrial parks.
What about green hydrogen? That gets a lot of buzz globally.
It gets a specific mention here, too. Egypt has signed some major agreements for multi-billion-dollar projects aimed at producing green ammonia using renewable energy to make hydrogen, then ammonia, primarily for export. They clearly see potential to become a global hub.
Any challenges for industry?
Yes, rising energy prices are noted as a potential issue, potentially undermining the competitiveness of Egyptian industries internationally if costs go up too much.
Okay. What about buildings?
Similar themes. Energy efficiency through things like LED lighting, promoting rooftop solar panels, and a focus on green building standards. One interesting initiative is their Housing for All program for low-income Egyptians. It's incorporating green building principles, using their own rating system called GPRS, the Green Pyramid Rating System. They report 7,000 certified units built already.
That's good to see. Tourism, quick mention.
Yeah, encouraging hotels and resorts to adopt renewable energy and become more energy efficient.
And waste management. Lots of potential for methane reduction there.
Definitely. They're working on improving the whole waste management infrastructure, better collection, more recycling, and developing waste-to-energy projects. New laws and strategies are in place. The report highlights progress, like closing 6 old, uncontrolled dump sites and replacing them with 21 modern sanitary landfills by 2023.
Any specific projects?
They mentioned plans for a large waste-to-energy plant near Giza, designed to process 1,200 tons of waste per day and generate about 30 megawatts of electricity. Also, using treated wastewater for irrigating green spaces in new cities, which helps conserve fresh water.
Challenges in waste.
The usual suspects.
Yeah.
Enforcing the new regulations effectively across the country, and securing the significant funding needed for these large-scale infrastructure projects like new landfills and WTE plants.
Okay, let's shift gears from mitigation cutting emissions to adaptation, dealing with the climate impacts that are already unavoidable. How vulnerable is Egypt?
The report paints a stark picture. Highly vulnerable. They state that over the last 30 years, temperatures have clearly risen, especially in summer. And counterintuitively, perhaps, while overall annual rainfall has decreased by about 22%, making water scarcity worse.
The rain that does fall is sometimes more intense.
Exactly, increasing the risk of dangerous flash floods. So, drier overall, but with more extreme rainfall events.
What do future climate projections show?
More warming? Significantly more, depending on the global emissions scenario, potentially between 2.1 and 5.7 degrees Celsius warmer by the end of this century. Projections also point to longer dry spells, but again, more intense rainfall when it happens.
And this is where Egypt's unique geography comes into play again, isn't it? Especially the Nile Delta.
Absolutely critical. The report explicitly mentions that the IPCC, the leading international body on climate science, identifies the Nile Delta as one of only 3 extreme vulnerability hotspots in the world.
Wow, why is it so vulnerable?
It's low-lying, making it susceptible to sea level rise, coastal erosion, and saltwater intrusion contaminating fertile land and freshwater sources. And because the entire country relies so heavily on the Nile, 97% of their water, the report says the Delta, and Egypt as a whole, is incredibly vulnerable to any changes in the river's flow caused by climate impacts further upstream in the Nile basin.
Is there an index or ranking that captures this vulnerability?
Yes, they cite the ND Gain Index from 2019. It assesses both vulnerability and a country's readiness to adapt. Egypt ranked 107th out of 181 countries.
So high vulnerability.
It definitely highlights the significant challenges they face due to that mix of environmental, geographic, and socioeconomic factors.
What impacts are they already seeing on the ground?
The report mentions impacts across the board. Water scarcity affecting agriculture, Public health issues from more intense and frequent heat waves. Coastal zones are already experiencing problems like storm surges, urban flooding, Alexandria is mentioned specifically, and saltwater getting into groundwater.
What about the human dimension, the socioeconomic impacts?
Vulnerability isn't evenly spread. Low-income communities are often hit hardest, living in more exposed areas or with less resilient housing and infrastructure. The report also points out specific vulnerabilities for women,